Good morning, everyone. Jo here from ATC, and joining me is Kevin Wheeler, all the way from San Fran. How are you, Kevin?
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody.
Now, before we start, I'd love to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Willam people of the Kulin Nation, where I am broadcasting from today, and to acknowledge and thank all of the custodians and elders of all of the lands that we're meeting on today. I'd love you to hit us up in the chat and tell us, which company, which talent team you're in and what state you're dialing in from, and get used to using chat and say good day to everyone. On your, as a little bit of housekeeping, on your settings there, it'll say in the chat, do you want to send this to hosts and panelists only, or if you want to send it to everyone. So of course, you can send it out to everyone and say good day to everyone on the line so we can get a feel for who's joining us today. Now, Kevin, you're in San Fran?
That's right, I am.
How are things in the US?
Things are good. The weather right now here is freezing cold, but
Right.
which is unusual for us. But other than that, things are pretty good.
Lovely. Good. Well, we can't wait to, get into your session. And I have noticed one little, edit on one of them. Now, maybe I just misread this, but you always call this the fearless forecast. At some point, did I see that you changed it to the fearful forecast, or was that just my eyes playing tricks on me?
No, right there.
There you go. Right. So that sounds a little ominous. Now, for everyone joining us today, just so that you understand the flow of today, Kevin's going to be sharing his 9 predictions that he shared with us at the ATC 2022 event at Luna Park in Sydney. Say good day in the chat if you're there and you're rejoining us again the next time around, or if this is your first time tuning into a fearless and this year fearful forecast. We're going to be running through Kevin's 9 predictions for possible work futures. And what we'll do is we will take your Q&A. Now, that's different to the chat box. So if you could look down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A there. That's where you ask a question. We're going to stop every second prediction and kind of catch up on questions before we move on to the next one. So you pop them in there and I will read them out to Kevin. Hopefully we can get them all covered. All right, Kevin, I'm going to leave you now. I'm going to say goodbye and I'll pop back after your second prediction.
Okay, thanks, Jo. Thanks for the introduction. And once again, hello, everyone. As Jo said, I normally call this the fearless forecast, looking into the future with optimism and excitement. And this year I call it the fearful forecast, not because I'm not excited or optimistic, but just because I think there's things that we need to obviously think about and be aware of, because times are changing, things are changing for sure. And I'm sure we're all aware of some of the things that have been going on that I'm going to touch on as I get into this more. But I just thought it would be wise to give a word of caution for this year, because it's going to be a year of change and a year of things being significantly different in recruiting than they were a year ago or 2 years ago. The pandemic is over and it's changed a lot of things. So as I look into this, I think there's volatile times ahead. I think this fear of a recession, although I'm not sure it's ever going to, we're really going to have a recession. I think that most of the economists that I've talked to and that I read about are saying that if we do have a recession, it's not going to be a significant one. It probably isn't going to be anything like the one we had a few years ago, and it will be quite brief. I hope they're correct. But I think it's something that we have to constantly think about. And I know companies are thinking about this in how they're dealing with hiring. The second thing is recruiter layoffs. And I know that you've probably heard about, sorry about that. I know you've probably heard about the thousands of people that have been laid off here in the United States over the last few months. I just want to point out that relative to the number of people that these companies hired over the last 2 years, it's a very, very small amount of people. It doesn't mean that it's any less traumatic for the people who've been laid off. But in terms of, looking at the big picture, in terms of the economy, it's a very small layoff relative to historical layoffs that have occurred here in the US in the recessions of 2009 and a few years before that. I'll talk a little more about layoffs as we get into this, as we get further along here. But the third one is just slowing down recruiting. And I think there's a lot of caution right now, given the fact that there might be a recession and we're not sure whether there is going to be or not. Companies are being cautious, rightly so, about their hiring. And I think they're being more targeted in the kind of people they're hiring and how many they're hiring. So I think that the days that we just can't hire enough people, we don't have enough recruiters, I think those days are coming to an end right now. So with those cautions ahead, let's look at some of the big issues I think we're going to be facing this year. The number one is clearly there are not enough qualified people for many of the jobs that we're looking for, particularly if you're looking at things in the newly emerging areas like cybersecurity and renewable energy. These are areas where they just don't have, the talent hasn't been created yet. We don't have people with academic backgrounds in this or experience. So there's a clear shortage in this, and we're going to be playing musical chairs for the people in those areas for the next few years until the supply increases. Things like in the tech industry in terms of project management, some kinds of programming, there's going to be a shortage of talent. The return to the office question is a good one. This is an interesting topic that we could probably do a whole webinar on, but I think the trend is that we're slowly moving back to the office, and I'll talk a little more about that later. But I think the excitement of remote work is waning. I think for many people it's a very legitimate and valid thing, but for others, it's probably not a big deal. Competition and salary remains a huge issue. We're having a big debate here in the US over salary transparency. Should we make every job salary range? Should we publish that in every job description? And now there's a new law in California and New York that requires that every job be posted with a salary range. And that's going to hopefully help the wage gap between men and women. We'll see if it does, but that's one of the goals of this, is to reduce that the very well documented gap in salaries between the salaries of men and women in many jobs. And then the last one is retention and quiet quitting, which I think are becoming less and less of an issue given the looming recession and the slowing down of things in general. So I think that even though people are still quitting quite frequently here in the US, at least, maybe not quite so much in Australia, but I think that there's a lot of people who are quitting in place, which I don't really like the term quiet quitting, but it's really about staying in your job but doing less and less, quietly quitting, silently quitting in your job, being less productive. I don't know how prevalent that is, but it's been a topic of conversation here in the US. So I don't know if these are going to remain top issues or not this year, but I think for sure the number one, not enough qualified people, is going to remain an issue throughout the year. So here are my predictions for 2023. Prediction number one, I think skilled talent, as we've already just talked about, is going to remain constrained for many years to come. Number one is demographics. Depending on where you are in the world, there are just not as many people as we used to have or as we need to have. Australia is a good example of a country with a shortage of people in general. Europe, Germany has serious trouble. Japan has a shortage of people. There's many countries in the world that just don't have enough people, and demographics are working against us in the fact that in the US, our workforce is aging rapidly. We've got a lot of the people who left the workforce at the pandemic were those over 55 years old. They opted to retire early, do other things, change their lifestyle. We've got younger people who are opting for a different lifestyle. They're saying, I don't want to go work for a corporation. I don't want to be tied down to an organization that can lay me off whenever they feel like it, and where I have very little say over whether or not I get laid off, even though I'm a good worker. I think we're finding that work itself is changing, and how we work, the requirements for work, moving to more project work, team-based work is changing things. And that's changing the attitudes that people have about work. We've got big sea changes in how people think about work, which leads to basically a shortage of traditional talent that us in recruiting are trying to bring into these companies. So, there may be, in some cases, there may not be a shortage of people. There may not even be a shortage of skills. It's just there may be a shortage of whether or not these people want to work for you, or whether they want to work for you in the way that you want them to work, or the way your company wants them to work. So we're going to have lots of issues there, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Training and development, most companies have sadly neglected internal development of people for the last decade at least, if not longer. I think for more like 2 decades. Training has been the minimal amount possible, is what has sort of been the rule of thumb. There hasn't been a lot of focus on giving people multiple skill sets or increasing skill sets. If there's anything, it's been saying it's your responsibility to educate yourself and washing their hands of any responsibility. And that's part of the reason for the difficulty in hiring. They haven't developed their own workforce. And in many countries around the world, in fact, in a growing number of countries, immigration is really the only way you can grow your economy. And yet companies are restricting immigration and not wanting people to come in. UK, Europe, the United States, we've all really had a backlash against immigration. There's a lot of misbeliefs about it's taking away jobs and so forth, when in reality, it's providing the very vital work that many countries need to have. So anyway, these are all the reasons why talent is going to remain a tough thing to find, a tough thing to hire, and a tough to keep. So, I think I've talked about all of these things, so I'm just going to move on the list, except for the one that I didn't really talk on is internal mobility. And clearly companies are now reaching within their company rather than hiring externally and saying, we need to promote more people inside our company. We need to develop our talent inside for the first time in a long time. And I think we're going to hire more people virtually than we have in the past. So I think, again, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. My second prediction isn't remote isn't as sustainable as people thought it was. And I touched on this in the beginning, but believe it or not, only about 16% of companies in the world are fully remote. It's pretty remarkable given the fact that we've had so much hype over the remote working, and that you would think that many more companies than this would be remote. And I would guess that of the 16% that are remote, a few percent of those are going to not be remote in the future. They're going to go back to having people work at least virtually. So 62% of workers in this core age group of 22 to 65 claim to work remotely occasionally. And I think that the hybrid work has become almost a norm now for many organizations, where you work 2 or 3 days a week, or you have some sort of flexibility in the days that you work. There's a trend, I think, of companies moving to a 4-day work week. And some of the economists are predicting that within the next 5 years, lots of companies, it may even become a legal issue that the number of hours required for work will be reduced by 1 day. We'll see if that's true. But amazingly, 44% of companies don't allow any remote work at all. You must come to work. And I will tell you, if I look here in the San Francisco area, the traffic is unbelievably bad. And I don't think it's any better than it was before the pandemic. Congestion is right back to normal, if you want to call that normal. And more people, I think, are actually opting, even if they don't have to, they're opting to go back to the office, probably for the collegial connections with people, for the community, for the friends they have, just to get out of the house. So I think there's a lot of interest in employees themselves in returning at least part of the time to work. And like this survey indicates here of the 9,000 workers, about 72% of workers prefer the hybrid working model where they have a couple of days at home and a few days in the office. So I think the number who always want to work in an office is going to continue to grow. And I know that here in the US, the pressure that CEOs and leaders are putting on employees to come back to the office is pretty strong. Google and others really don't want any even hybrid work. They would prefer everybody to be at work every day. So we'll see where this goes, but it's really in flux right now. And there's a real tension around what is the right way to work. You know, for many years, we just accepted it was 5 days a week, roughly 8 hours a day in the office. And the pandemic upset that whole apple cart, so to speak. And now we're trying to figure out what the future is going to look like. So I'm sure all of you have personal preferences, and I'll bet if we did a survey here, we'd find out that not everybody agrees on anything, on any one of these ways to work. So it's going to be a really interesting time. It's a factor in why people don't want to come to work in companies. I've talked to many organizations that said, and recruiters who said, I can't hire people because we require them to be in the office, or because we require them to be in the office 2 days a week, or in a few cases, because we don't want them to be in the office at all. So it's a really interesting phenomena that's going on out there around that. We can look at how many jobs that are posted. This is a little bit out of date. This is in November last year. I don't think it's very much different now, but 51% of applicants to remote jobs want remote jobs. Look, they apply to remote jobs, but only 14% of jobs are remote. So there's a huge gap between the number of people who want to work remotely, according to this, and this is a LinkedIn talent survey, and the number who actually, the number of jobs that are actually listed or posted as being remote. So remote is not that typical. Okay, I think we're going to stop now for some questions. I see Joe has popped back up.
Yeah, here I am. Okay, so just to sort of go back, picking up a few of the things that you said in prediction 1 and 2. So you talked about, you know, organizations hired a huge amount of people. You know, the numbers seem really scary in terms of, you know, laying off. Amazon laid off 18,000 people. Now that is a pretty big number, but it doesn't come in context with the additional people, you know, they've hired in the last year or so. And you had an interesting stat you shared with me earlier, Kevin. How many people was it that Amazon increased their workforce by?
Well, they hired somewhere from 2019 or 2020 to 2023, over 100,000 completely new jobs were hired at Amazon or created at Amazon in that period of time, right, primarily to meet the demands of the pandemic. Everybody working from home, ordering everything online, demanding everything being delivered. So they added about 100,000 jobs, warehouse jobs and white collar jobs as well, supply chain jobs, because the supply chain was struggling. And they've laid off 18,000. So right, even for 18,000 people, it's traumatic and not a fun situation to be in, but relative to 100,000 plus, it's a really, really small percentage of people that are in.
We've got a question here by Rebecca. So what was the geography of the share of remote jobs posting data? Was that this is this slide we've got come up. So this is LinkedIn Talent Connect. Is that global, US?
Yeah. This is global, however global LinkedIn is. Okay. All right. So I think it's fairly linked in with English speaking population.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. I was having a look there, you know, it's interesting. There's this, you know, typical kind of bell curve scenario where we've got, you know, 12 or 13% on either side, always want to work in the office or always want to work from home. The rest of the 70 plus people, 70% plus people are in that middle group of, I'd like a little from column A and a little from column B. So, very interesting though, we've got 44% of companies not allowing remote work of any kind, but only 12% of people always want to be in the office. So, clearly there are a number of companies here winning in terms of their 51% of, job applications to remote work. Now, the role of the recruiter, this is something that, we plan on touching on both from a, supply and demand perspective of what's going to happen with talent teams, as well as what we can do in terms of the role of the recruiter being more strategic to be less supply and demand reliant for the sustainability of the, size of the talent team. So I just want to flag that we will be covering that in the next Q&A section. Just checking any more questions here. Are we starting to see any trends of hybrid work, like, 2 days in the office versus 3 days versus 4 days? So, what does that kind of hybrid look like?
I think it's become the 3 in, 2 at home has become the standard. If I look at the companies I'm seeing, pretty much everybody I've talked to, every client that I have, every company that I've dealt with, it's been the 3-2 ratio. What are the 3 days and what are the 2 days becomes the real sticking point, I guess. Do I have any control over the days I'm in the office, or are they prescribed? And are they what days are they? What they are. So those are the arguments, I guess, that are going on, or the discussions, or the happiness or unhappiness of people are based on that, from what I can tell. But it looks like the hybrid model is probably here to stay to some degree, depending on the company you work for and the leadership. But
depending on employees, how much you don't get sometimes if you don't demand. So we just got to keep that expectation up there and loud. Let me just check the QA box one more time. No, we're good now. So let's I'll leave you for prediction number 3.
Okay, let's move on. All right. So prediction 3 is about the supply chain. And, I think we really need to look at recruiting as a supply chain issue. Okay. And whoever understands the supply chain of talent is going to win the war for talent. And clearly there is going to be a war if we believe in this, growing shortage, both of people and skills. So when I look at the supply chain, this is kind of what I look at it. A generic supply chain for products, whatever, is you have to have some sort of a strategic plan. Then you have to decide where to source your materials. So if you look at an Amazon, they have to have some sort of a plan about what are people going to be ordering, what's the market going to look like for various kinds of products. Is it going to be driven by technology products, by fashion products? What are going to be the big things? And this is true whether you're Kohl's or whether you're Woolworth or whether you're Amazon. Okay, then you've got to say, where am I going to get these products? Where are they going to come from? Where are they going to come from? China? Are they going to come from Australia? Are they going to come from Asia or the United States? And then are we going to store them in a warehouse, or are we going to have them just in time? And then you've got to say, okay, how do we provide these to people? Are we going to, deliver them, fulfill them? How are we going to get them out to you? And then we have to analyze and assess where we are and feed that back into our planning cycle. So in recruiting, it's really no different. We should have a plan. I think one of the reasons to some degree for the current layoff situation, and historically always for the layoff situation, is that organizations do a really, really bad job of talent planning. They don't plan for internal mobility. They don't plan for, growth. They don't plan for these things. They don't have any contingency plans. They don't do scenario planning. So that's a huge area. Then the talent intelligence and sourcing, and in recruiting, knowing where people are and what skills are available, where they're located, rather than every single time we get a position, it's like a green field. We have to go out there and say, oh, gee, I wonder if there's anybody with those skills around. Where is our intelligence? Where is our database of people? Where is our community or pipeline of talent that we can feed into this as opposed to a warehouse? A database is really a kind of a warehouse, but how do we have more just in time, where we have communities of people, where we have connections with people, networks of people that we can tap into when we need them? And I think from workforce plan to the communities and pipelines, recruiting has done a very poor job of supply chain management. We don't have good plans. We don't have contingency plans. We don't have good intelligence. And we don't really have very many good talent communities. And then our recruitment process. How do we get these people from the database or from the network into our organizations and working? What does that process look like? How fast is it? How efficient is it? How engaging is it? And again, I think we've got lots of flaws here, as we all are aware. And then, of course, part of that is negotiating, hiring, and closing the deal. How do we negotiate? Are our salaries competitive? Can we meet the demands that the workers have? And we just talked about the work week, the working conditions. Can we meet any of those? And then what's our analytics look like? Do we know how many we've hired, how difficult it was, where they came from, and how we feeding that back into the workforce planning? So again, the supply chain is a really, really critical piece of how we should be thinking in recruiting. And I think we're very poor at doing this for the most part. Most recruiters spend the majority of their time either looking for people or in that recruitment process and negotiating piece. We don't spend enough time in the workforce planning, in the talent intelligence, and in the analytics. So I think we can, in the Q&A, maybe you have questions about this, we can talk more about this, but I think this is a huge area for discussion and improvement for all of us in the recruitment industry and world. And it's part of the cause of the layoffs that we're just seeing right now. Prediction number 4 is back to this fact that we have to expand how we look at the workforce if we're going to overcome these people and talent shortages that exist out there. So if we continue to insist on looking for people that fit very narrow job descriptions, that are willing to work on the hours and the conditions that we put forth, we are limiting our workforce significantly. We're really reducing the number of people and the kinds of talent that we should have and could bring into organization. So for example, if we look at the kinds of people that are available out there, we've got obviously the normal full-time worker. We've got people that want part-time work. We've got people that just want to work temporarily. We've got people who want a contract or should be on a contract or could be on a contract. We want people who are consultants who can come in and help us solve a problem or fix something. We've got vendors who are really part of our extended workforce through strategic partnerships. We've got people that just want to work once in a while. Sometimes I want to work, but not all the time. And we've got robots and avatars and algorithms and software that's part of the workforce. So when we really think about hiring for a job, one of the first things we should say is, should this be a full-time job? And we just automatically, and I say we, meaning hiring managers, recruit, all of us, we automatically just say every job should be full-time. And yet, if we really think about it, there's plenty of jobs that could be sometime. For example, a tax accountant might only be needed when the tax season comes. Otherwise, we don't need them. Maybe it's a consultant is only needed when we've got a certain kind of an issue. Contractors can do very specific project work. So you need to say, look at this job, look at what we are asking person to do, and then say, what kind of skill set or background is useful for doing this job? And we should expand that to include people that have physical disabilities, mental challenges, elderly people. We know we're losing many of those over 65 out of the workforce. How do we re-include them in this workforce when they don't want to work full-time? They might want to work part-time. They might only want to work sometime. How do we make opportunities for them to help bridge the talent shortages that we have and these gaps we have in the talent in the workforce? So these are things we really need to be thinking about and struggling to figure out, how do we convince a hiring manager? How do we how do we go back to our talent planning, our workforce planning here, and build this into that workforce plan so that not every job has to have this long list of credentials that are mandatory. So we really look at jobs versus skills. I'm sorry, we'll stop here. Okay, sorry, Joe.
No worries. So, Kevin, you've got this great image here of how we'll be expanding the profile, the makeup of our workforce. Who should and how does this really get led? How does this discussion get led internally? Because we see it on the page, but then in the eyes of hiring managers and leadership who have other ideas about how work is done, how do we bridge that gap?
Well, somehow there has to be a conversation inside the organization with HR, with the leadership, and with hiring managers and recruiting, all working together to say, look, this is a real problem. We're not going to be able to find all the talent we need in these areas. So how can we expand this workforce? So am I optimistic that we'll have that conversation? No, I'm not, unfortunately. But I think we should definitely try to have that conversation, and we should try to get people to engage in discussing this and creating some sort of an overall talent plan for the company.
So in terms of workforce planning, and I know, in the past, we've had a lot of discussions about big and small, workforce planning, strategic workforce planning. And workforce planning quite often sits in C-suite rather than within, within talent. Is the answer just to create closer connections? Is the answer to restructure how the talent office looks?
I think it's about restructuring how the talent office should look. And I've written a lot about that. I've posted things about that and talked a lot about that. I don't think we're organized effectively right now. I think these silos that we're in, an HR silo and a recruiting silo and all this just doesn't work anymore. We've got to be more communicating better and planning together. I honestly think if a company like even an Amazon or anybody else, if they had a strategic workforce plan at the level they do for their business, that they would never have had to hire 100,000 people as full-time employees, lay them off. Okay. Yeah. To me, that's an abrogation of leadership responsibility. It's something that should be punished, not rewarded. And yet the stock market rewards leaders for laying people off. And I think that's really almost criminal in the fact that they would rarely do this with their products. If they did this with their products, they would fire every supply chain manager and product person in the company. Okay. But when it comes to people, we don't have that same attitude. And we need to say, out of those 100,000, many of those people could have been hired as part-time or temporary workers, and you would never have needed to have these. So it's really a matter of a more holistic, inclusive strategic planning process. It can't just be recruiting. It can't just be HR. It's got to be coordinated with all the other pieces of the organization.
And so thinking about the supply chain chart that you had, let's talk about the change in reporting that would go along with that. What if someone was to go down that path of the supply chain model? Thank you. What new or additional metrics do you suggest that they incorporate?
Well, I mean, there's just so many things that we don't analyze or have metrics for at all. In terms of our workforce plan, how effective was it? Were we predictive? Were we not predictive of the workforce? Even if you can't have that holistic conversation I just talked about, at least from a recruiting perspective, you could say, based on historical precedent or based on what we see coming in the future, we should plan to recruit more of this or less of this. We should have our own contingency plans and scenario planning. We should have a scenario saying, what if we suddenly were asked to recruit all of these people, and how would we deal with that? Or what would happen if we were asked to not recruit any more of these people? How would we redistribute our recruiting workforce? So there, you could, first of all, is there a plan that's robust, and was it effective? In terms of talent intelligence, do we have any knowledge of the people that we're hiring? You know, what kind of intelligence data do we have? If I asked you as a recruiter, how many electrical engineers are there in Sydney? If you could tell me that, that would be a point in your favor, okay? I'm pretty sure none of us could answer that question. So these are metrics that are not like hardcore numbers, but they're things that you should be thinking about and having knowledge of, which to me are a kind of metric, part of an analysis, right? That you should have. Your community and pipeline. How many people did we hire from a community versus how many did we have to go out and beat the bushes to find? To me, that should be a key metric. If we're saying that it's 80-20, then we better fix that 20%. We better get that 20% up to 30 or 40%. How do we make our communities more robust? How do we build a better pipeline or network than we have? Okay. What do you want it to be? First of all, part of your workforce plan, what's our ideal ratio? And then how close are we to getting to that? I've never known any recruiting function that has that metric or has even that thinking process, okay? So in the recruitment process, there's a million metrics, and we've got lots of those, from time to hire to all these other things, most of which are not very valuable, but which are really all rearview mirror looking, but not very forward looking. And so forth. So there's all sorts of things in here. Some of them can be single point numbers, but some of these things are really more about, do you have one in place? Was it effective? How many did we get from here or there? So there's all sorts of things that we could put into here. And I know that Trevor and I are both working on building out some of these for the future. So a lot of things that we can think about here, a lot of things.
Now, on the topic of, obviously there are some layoffs happening, and, some of the bigger tech companies and, some people acting a little more conservatively, having a look at, what the next 12 or so months looks like for a talent acquisition professional within a TA team. Do you see kind of the supply chain model or this more holistic view of talent advisory being the kind of savior to, yep, we need more recruiters because supply is up, we need less recruiters because supply is down?
I mean, clearly, the recruiters who have been laid off, for the most part, most likely, were people in that recruitment process area who were simply processing people, screening candidates by phone, or doing some other scheduling interviews, or doing something like that. Clearly, that's not the future of recruiting. That is clearly going to become more and more augmented with technology. It may not, I'm not saying it's going to be replaced, but instead of 4 people doing it, you may only need 1 person doing it, because technology can fill in the gaps and do a lot of the work for you, okay? Where we don't have the right kinds of people or enough people are people doing that upfront planning, that talent intelligence piece. We may have lots and lots of people beating the bushes for sourcing, but we don't have enough people building networks and pipelines and communities. So the community manager, that kind of whole thing, the whole upfront marketing piece that we're going to talk about in a few minutes here is a critical component to this. So, well,
that's a good segue, because a question's come in to say, do you think there needs to be a level of acceptance by organizations that the goal of a loyal workforce is now very hard to achieve, and the word retention should more relate to retaining pipelines and communities rather than the actual employees?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, if you don't have a robust community and network and pipeline, it's going to be a real negative for your company because you're
Yeah.
not going to have the talent you need. So absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific. Paul Jacobs, yes, don't you worry. Generative AI and Chat GPT are coming up in a future
Coming.
prediction. So it's coming. All right, I'll leave you to get to the next set.
Okay, great. So this one is skills are winning over jobs. And I think we're seeing already many, many organizations here in the US at least are reconfiguring jobs or rethinking jobs as more a set of skills than it is meeting this in-depth checklist of degrees, qualifications, and so forth that are required to do the job. We're saying, first of all, do you have the basic set of skills? Do you have the ability to be flexible, agile, and learn quickly? Are you willing to dive in and be enthusiastic about whatever it is that you're going to be asked to do? So much less focus on what your degree was, and I'll show you some statistics on that in a minute. Much less focus on what your past experience has been, because many of the jobs in the past are changed so significantly that past experience is useful, but it's not really critical. And in some cases, it's irrelevant. So what are the ability to learn, to grow? What are your ability to, how flexible and agile are you? And the skill set is becoming far more important to a hiring decision than just the fact that you have these solid credentials. And I've been doing this for 5 years. Okay, you've been doing a bad job at recruitment processing for the last 5 years. Should that qualify you to be a recruiter? To me, I'd rather hire somebody who's got more of a supply chain mentality, who's got much more of a forward-thinking mindset in my recruiting function, than to hire somebody who's just done a mediocre or even poor job of, and it's hard to judge. But if you've just been, screening people and scheduling interviews, I don't consider that a very valuable skill. So I would be looking at skills that are more valuable, more challenging, and people that have the ability and the willingness to move and change. And we've seen that, recruiting has already been broken into pieces, and it might be that you hire somebody who's just a piece of this, which we've already done. But the real question here is, should we continue to deconstruct jobs, or should we put them back together and make them more holistic and augment them with technology? And we don't have time to get into that here, but it's a great discussion. Right now we've taken, when I started in recruiting, which was like the last century, you did pretty much all of these things. You had to write the job description, you had to promote and advertise the job. You had to find people, you had to screen them, you had to do all these jobs, you had to do everything here. And what we've done in the last 20 years or so, or maybe 10 years, is we've taken many of these skills away and we say, okay, now you just are a sourcer. All you do is you go look for people. And for you, you're just an assessment person. You screen and assess and you interview. That's all you do. Or for you, you're going to be the interface with the hiring manager and you're going to do these kind of things. And we've taken these jobs and either given one person 2 or 3 of these skills, or in some cases, given one person only one of these skills. So we've really made this job more fragmented than it needs to be. And we've probably increased the number of people involved in recruiting to the number that way more than we need. I know organizations that have been recently had layoffs of recruiters have hired so many recruiters that I was just shocked at the number. They laid off, 100 recruiters when I thought they had no more need for more than 50. So why? Because we're going to these kind of much more broken down defined job requirements. We have 20 sourcers. Do you really need to have 20 sourcers? Where's technology? Where's your pipeline? Where's your community? And so forth. So we need to really think about this. And then there's a very significant decreased focus on credentials right now. So I think the trend is going to be to deconstruct more jobs into specific skills. which is okay if you're hiring that expanded ecosystem that I talked about. If I'm going to hire a consultant or a contractor to do a particular skill, I have no problem doing that. But inside the company, I think we need people with more holistic skill sets and broader based skill sets, and hiring people with complementary skills so they can form better teams. And I think we're seeing the number of jobs that require no degree is increasing, and the number of jobs that require a graduate degree is decreasing pretty significantly. And more jobs in America now, many jobs are being listed as no degree required at all. We're really starting to look for people with these skills here, varied and changing skills, broad, varied backgrounds, flexible, agile people, good learners, people that maybe have had multiple careers and multiple different jobs. So suddenly those become benefits instead of liabilities, which they may have been in the past. So it's a really different landscape than we've seen. And I'm not saying this is here fully yet, but if this is the trend, is in this direction. And I think you're going to see a lot more of it this year and next year. So.
Okay, so Kevin, what changes in attitudes organizationally will be required to implement skills over jobs?
Well, I mean, clearly we've got to get hiring managers less fixated on a degree and as a minimum requirement for a job. And as I said, many companies, Microsoft, Google did this years ago. But many other companies are now saying that the degree is not really critical. We don't really care what your degree is in. If you even have a degree, you don't even need to have one. If it's in English, it's okay. We don't care what it's in. Okay. So I think the mindset is already shifting to a large degree in the larger, more forward-looking companies. But it really requires hiring managers and senior leadership to embrace this, all right, and to understand that if we're going to overcome the talent challenges that we face, we're going to have a different approach to hiring people. We can't expect everybody to fit the traditional, 20th century job description, nor to work the traditional 40-hour work week.
Yeah.
So it really requires leadership with a different mindset, and it requires recruiters to do the best they can do to influence hiring managers to think differently.
And from a skills versus, jobs perspective, I mean, part of that is just, I guess, widening and opening up who you would see as a candidate. But from a skills jobs perspective, you're talking about restructuring position descriptions, restructuring how work gets done, like you can think about that in theory, but again, what attitudes need, adjusting, and what conversations do we need to have internally, and who needs to be leading it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, clearly there's certain jobs that require credentials legally and otherwise, doctor, nurse, lawyer, accountant. Okay. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about all the myriad other jobs in the company that there's no real legal or other requirement to have that job. Recruiter is a good example, okay? There's no requirement to have any particular degree in recruiting. So what would you look for? Look for, as I said before, I would look somebody who's got more of a supply chain mentality and so forth. That comes back to the hiring manager, the head of the recruiting function. They can say, I'm not going to hire any more people that have just been in normal recruiting jobs. I want some people that have been in marketing or people that have had other backgrounds in their job. So some of this doesn't require a big change. It just requires a hiring manager to change their attitude or their demands. I don't think very few of these jobs require a senior level approval. All right. It's just a matter of a hiring manager saying, okay, I'm willing to deal with this. I'm willing to take somebody and hire this kind of person. So maybe there are a few jobs, particular jobs in the company. Can't think of which ones they might be at the moment, but there's some that might be more controversial and need a higher level decision around those. But generally speaking, I think probably 80% of these jobs that don't have a legal requirement could be the hiring manager's decision.
They could be disrupted. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I'll let you get on with the next prediction.
All right. Great. Okay. Number one, this is technology, AI. I've kind of touched on it in the past here, but I'm just going to continue. I think our partnership with tools, technology, artificial intelligence is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to get stronger. I think we in recruiting need to have more of a collaboration attitude rather than an anti-attitude. I get a feeling that a lot of us are either not really embracing technology, maybe even anti-technology, thinking I can do it as well as technology or better than the technology can do it, or we're afraid of the technology in a way. We don't have the skills or we don't understand it. I think we need to get over that. We need to understand that we're going to be working with artificial intelligence tools for the rest of our lives. And they're going to continue to get better. They're going to continue to get more powerful. And they're going to continue to take over things that we used to do and do them as well or better than we used to do them. So we have to say, what can we do that's uniquely human that they are not able to do? And how can we use these tools to provide everybody a better experience, the candidate and ourselves and the company a better experience? So a great example is screening tools. There are so many good tools that can screen candidates, initially at least, for jobs that don't involve any telephone screens or any need for a recruiter to be involved. It might be a kind of a test. It might be a chat bot. And I can hear all the arguments. Yeah, but the yeah bots have to go away. We have to say, how do we make these work? How do we do this so we don't need to hire so many recruiters and just have them laid off? How can we make these tools work so I can go do something that's a lot more interesting and exciting than what I'm doing, than screening people? I think we could eliminate many job interviews. I think we could do so many things with technology that already exists and is already good, but we're not really using it effectively. Are we really using the sourcing tools we have effectively? I see companies that have very expensive sourcing technology, and they still are sourcing with Boolean strings and searching the internet. Why? Why are you doing this? Why not use the technology? Okay, you may find one person that the technology didn't find. Big deal. The whole thing is, are you significantly better than the technology? And my answer is probably you're not. So we really have to begin to embrace these tools, not to replace our jobs, not to get rid of people, but to put them to work to help us and make us more efficient, and maybe not make us hire as many people as we have in the past in recruiting. So my whole thing here is we really need to continue to build this collaboration. We need to continue to accept the fact that AI is coming, whether we like it or not. And it's better for us to embrace it and live with it than to lose the losing battle of fighting it. And when we get to talk about Chat GPT in a little bit here, we'll get into this a little bit more. Prediction number 7 is that one of the major requirements in recruiting, because of the talent and skill shortage, is going to be marketing and branding. These are going to become core requirements. And I think we're so bad at this, in recruiting. Most big companies rely on their product brand as their recruitment brand. So if you're working for, a big bank or a big manufacturing company, that's your brand. Everybody wants to work for us because we're X. But what if you're not X? What if you're unknown or little known? What if you're a much smaller company or not a huge popular employer? Then you absolutely need to have a presence. You've got to be marketing. You've got to be reaching out, building your network, building your community through engagement, through branding and marketing your products through your career site and through every other tool that exists out there, social media, whatever it takes. And it will be a combination of things. But employment marketing and branding are going to become core metrics for success. When Joe asked me a while ago, what are some metrics? How good is your marketing? How many people are you attracting? How many qualified good people are you attracting? Are you really having to really beat the bushes with sourcing to find people? Or are people actually coming and knocking on your door? And to me, one metric would be how many knocked on my door versus how many do we have to go and drag in? And I'd much rather have them knocking on my door through good marketing, good branding, and so forth than I would being forced to go out there and get them. So I think we need to have a far more targeted marketing. Right now, whatever recruitment marketing that I see is generally just very general stuff. Come work for us. We're a great place to work. We're the best employer of who? Of engineers, of HR people. Who are you the best employer for? I mean, we have to be much more targeted. Come buy a car. We have good cars. Well, nobody sold a car that way. You sell a car through a brand, whether it's, a Mercedes or a Toyota, totally different brand, attracts a totally different audience, totally different buyer. And the same thing we have to have at targeted marketing and recruiting, sponsored job ads, broadcasting, podcasts, radio, even social media, career sites, but many different career sites, mini career sites, much stronger referral networks, and much more relevant content than we have today. Interactive content, engaging content. It can't be boilerplate PR stuff. It's got to be genuine and realistic kinds of marketing. So this is an area that we really need to focus on. And I would say, I'd rather hire a marketing person than somebody who does sourcing or somebody who does, some sort of screening. For sure, I would rather hire somebody who does marketing if I was leading a talent function. Okay, are we going to pop back in, Joe?
I think based on the time we've got left, if you want to continue through with 8 and 9, we'll catch up for more questions at the end.
Okay, great. No problem. Happy. Okay, RPO. RPO is just sort of sleeper. I think a lot of people don't realize how much they've grown in the last decade. They're growing really, really quickly. Let's see if I had the figures here. No, I don't. Okay, sorry. But they've been growing at an annual growth rate of between 14 and 17% a year for the last 5 years. That's huge, huge amount of growth. So more and more organizations are actually using them as part of their recruiting force to supply them with candidates, whether it's hourly workers, whether it's warehouse workers, whether it's white collar workers. So RPO has really moved away from that mass volume recruitment, which is what they historically were known for, into being just as good at recruiting highly skilled technology talent, scientists. There are RPOs that focus purely in the medical field, purely in the academic field, purely in like cybersecurity. So it reduces the need for a huge number of people in the internal talent acquisition function. RPOs are historically much more likely to embrace the technology that I just talked about and use it because it increases their profit than internal functions are. And I think part of that is because RPOs are willing and able to invest money in technology when many internal functions, which are looked at as cost centers, have a difficult time justifying buying technology because it's looked at a cost, not as an investment. So the RPO is going to continue to grow. I think you're going to see it continue to grow this year. Many or several companies here in the US have outsourced pretty much all of their recruiting to an RPO, and they don't have any internal recruiting function at all. So significant shift going on here, and I think that's going to continue to grow over the next year. Almost my last one. Prediction number 9 is that talent intelligence and analytics are really going to become the norm. You have to have analytics if you're going to do talent planning, like I talked about in my supply chain model. If you're going to get any of these metrics that you're going to have about how effective your sourcing is, how effective your networks and communities are, you're going to need talent intelligence and analytics in order to figure that out for them to become the norm. You're going to have much better ability to gather data, look at that data to get insights into, people, skills, jobs, and so forth. That means you're probably going to have either a partnership with your internal analytics group, if you have one, or you're going to have to hire a talent analyst for your TA function. And again, these are different roles. Most TA functions haven't had an analytics person. So, a marketing person and analytics person are becoming core, I think, to marketing teams now, and are important hires for you to think about in the future. But without talent intelligence and analytics, you're going to be very, very limited in your ability to become a more holistic supply chain provider. Number 10 is the last prediction. And what are the technologies that are emerging that will have an impact? And there are a few big ones. I every year have put up, many years, I put up this chart. Some of you may have seen this or not in the past, but things on the left-hand side, the green things are kind of the ones that are here, established. We all understand them for the most part. The things that are in the red here in the emerging area, things like virtual and augmented reality, generative AI, these are emerging trends that are going to have a big impact on us in the future. And I'm going to just touch on a couple. First one I'll touch on is going to be the virtual and augmented reality. Virtual reality, the Meta, Facebook thing is probably far in the future, probably at least a decade away from being useful for recruiting. But augmented reality, which is where we just put a layer of intelligence or simulation on top of things, is going to become much more common and available. So for example, to simulate a work experience, I think that's going to become something that you can readily develop or buy in the near future, in this year and the coming years. Tools to help onboarding that give people a realistic view of your organization so they can take a tour through your company or meet people virtually through augmented reality. I think you can do career fairs, virtual career fairs that will be quite realistic and so forth. So this is all in the realms of augmented reality, which is already happening, and I think will continue to be a force for this year and the future. The next one, which is probably the big one, is generative AI. This is the ChatGPT that you probably have all been reading about and hearing about. It's super hyped right now. And the real question is ChatGPT the future? And the answer is, yeah, it's probably going to have a major part to play in the future of recruiting. It's going to be able to automatically generate marketing material for you. It's already doing it. It's already doing this. It's able to generate job descriptions. It's able to, candidates are now using it to generate their CVs, to validate or improve their CVs. They're using data from hundreds of thousands of companies, candidates that have been successful and what they put on their CVs. They're using it to write cover letters, if you still use those. It's amazing. And we're talking about GPT-3. Before this year is over, they're going to release GPT-4, which is supposed to be an order of magnitude more powerful than GPT-3. If you're not familiar with ChatGPT, you should go to the website. It's ChatGPT. It's called OpenAI is the company, and it's free, and you can use it if they have any bandwidth available. There's so many people using it that sometimes it's hard to log on. But if you go ahead and give it a try, and just tell me, write me an article about X or write me a job description about Y, and see what it provides. I think I did one here. I had it write out a job description for an electrical engineer. And this is what it came up with for me. And you can take a minute to scan through this. But basically, is it a world-class job description? No, probably not yet. Is it a serviceable one, a usable one as a template for you to tweak? Absolutely. So, if you're like going to have to draw a job description for a job that you haven't ever had to recruit for before, this could be an incredible way to write that initial job description that you could then tweak out or take to a hiring manager and have them give you some input on it and so forth. So it's going to continue to play a huge role in, not just in recruiting, it's going to play a huge role in school. Kids are using it to write essays now, and even into the elementary school. Universities are really worried that theses and term papers are being written by ChatGPT now. And as it expands its database and its ability to access information, it gets more and more powerful. And I said GPT-4 will be really powerful. This one was written by another tool called HyperWrite. There are numerous ones out there. There's another one called Jasper. Jasper, Hyperwrite, ChatGPT-3 is this big one right now, but these are both out there. These are not free. These cost money. GPT-3 has become so popular right now because it's free. It won't be. It won't. Soon it won't be, but right now it is. So I would suggest playing with it when you can. Definitely a major player for our future, and we're going to see it doing all kinds of stuff. And then NFTs, and this is maybe going to happen. Okay, it's already sort of happened, but this is where you actually can sell your CV to a recruiter. Basically, a recruiter could buy it as a crypto. So let's say I'm a cybersecurity expert, and you really want to know about me. Well, I may ask you to pay for me with Bitcoin or with some other cyber currency. It's already happening. There's a company here called Blend Hire as a job board that you pay for the data that you use. So if you want to download a CV, you have to pay for it. These are NFTs, are non-fungible tokens, which is a fancy word for a digital asset, basically. This is sort of a maybe prediction. We'll see where it goes. Given the implosion of the cyber currency world in the last few months, maybe not, but we'll see. It's an interesting concept, and something like this may well play out in the near future. So be aware and be ready to see it when it comes. So those are the three big predictions in terms of technology. The big one is the ChatGPT stuff. That's the biggie. Okay, so.
Lovely. And we actually had somebody ask, what does GPT stand for, which I understand to be generative pre-trained transformer, which I don't think made it any clearer to me.
No, I agree. It's absolutely no clearer than GPT.
Yeah. Fabulous. Well, look, I think that's all we've got time for today, given that we are, just over the hour. But thank you so much, Kevin. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to email them through to us at joe@atcevents.com.au. If you feel like your talent function has got some really exciting things going on and you would love to feature in one of our articles or be a speaker at one of our events, please also get in touch. And if you haven't already, definitely subscribe to Future of Talent, because Kevin's writing is prolific. So thank you all so much for coming along, and thank you, Kevin, for sharing your session again. Can't wait to hear the next one.
Lots of fun. Yeah. Good luck, everybody.
Awesome.
Have a great year. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.